to end it. All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Rolo, the Puerto Rican Pistolero, coming to you live from the Puerto Rican Pistolero studios here in beautiful, sunny Puerto Rico. Sorry about the confusion there, ladies and gentlemen. For some reason, it jumped onto Eastern time for me. And normally my PC knows that I am on Atlantic Standard Time, which is 1 hour ahead of Eastern Time. So I posted this for 7 p.m. Eastern, and it ended up being incorrect. Or I had originally posted it for 7 p.m., but it took it to 7 p.m. Atlantic Time and not Eastern Time, even though I've got everything set up for Eastern Time. So I apologize about that. But I know we're going to be going through the time change on the East Coast soon, so everything will be the same. So that is the time that the show will be broadcast at going forward. Greg the Goblin, oh my gosh, dropping the 50 for the Kitten Fund. In case you didn't see it on Twitter, the kittens are doing well. I'm gonna have to bring up the photo because Greg brought it up already. So we're gonna do it. We're doing it right here. There you go. The kittens are doing well. They are being trained to be on the harness. Thank you so much, Greg. Greg the Goblin, as always, uh, just supporting the show. I am truly blessed that after all these years you're still around, Greg, and that you really like what we do here. So I really appreciate that. So there's the kittens. They are doing well, Mr. Moo and Miss Lucy Lou. If you wanted to rhyme, falling asleep on my lap while I was working at the farm the other day. I was using Starlink and it does work really well. And I've been very thoroughly impressed by it thus far. But I've got them trained to climb on my shoulders. They're shoulder cats already, and putting them on the harnesses so they can walk around and check out the goats and chickens that we've got on the farm over there without causing chaos and destruction. So that's where I posted the update for that. I may make some videos with them uh, and on the farm because the goats are pretty funny. We'll see. Maybe it'll be some shorts that we can post. Maybe it'll be something for the members. But it's pretty fun stuff. So they're doing well. They've got a veterinarian's appointment to follow up this Tuesday. And if they've got a clean bill of health, then maybe the super floof can be integrated with them. She's sleeping right here. You can see in the mirror. She's knocked out right now. And because she's got a clean bill of health. Ritsu's about 7 years old. She is also a rescue from Puerto Rico. So that's just a habit that my family has made over the years of rescuing animals from Puerto Rico. And the kittens are no different. Thank you so much, Greg the Goblin, for the 50, and for Joe C 1818 for the gifted sub before the show got started. Loquacious got that. So I appreciate all of you. We've got a good show packed. You know, one of the things that's been crazy about the Trump era, and I mentioned this before, is that it's difficult to prepare for a show that's once a week sometimes because you can't really label the show and what you're going to talk about in advance because things are changing every day. And between what Doge is doing, between world events and even pop culture and national news of different subjects that may not have to do with Donald Trump and his administration, there are things happening every single day, and it's all interrelated in one way or the other. So I had to kind of break it down, and things changed because obviously we were expecting the Epstein list on Thursday of this week. That was an entire debacle. I'll talk a little bit about that and some of the things that I've heard from different streamers and influencers and media personalities that were invited to the White House that day that got the now infamous binder and what they had to say about that. There are a couple of different perspectives on what may have happened there and the fact that we didn't get an update on Friday Then obviously, I think the biggest news of the weekend has been what's been going on with Zelensky and the whole Ukraine deal and the confrontation that he had with Trump and JD Vance at the Oval Office on Friday, and the repercussions that have been going on with that. And then also, I've been interested, and it's a topic that I've avoided because I think it's almost kind of more of a social topic. But as I've seen kind of the backlash on both sides of this argument with Andrew Tate, and how conservatives are treating that entire situation, it's something that I do want to weigh in on because I find it very interesting and disconcerting at the same time, as a as a conservative commentator, and somebody who holds a completely different set of moral values than Andrew Tate. And I thought that's kind of what conservatism stood for. But I do kind of want to weigh in on that because it just seems like it's exploding, and it's something that conservatism is going to have to deal with at some point. And it seems like we've gone in one direction, but the influencer space, as usual, wants to pull it in a different way, and there's a conflict there. So I think that's interesting. We'll end it on that if once we get to it. It looks like Israel's going to go back into Gaza. Uh, so we'll see what the repercussions there are for the Middle East and obviously the United States. And there's a lot more going on as well with the world. So we will start with wow. Okay. See, that's what happens when you scroll on Twitter. You start seeing things, and they make you pause. So we will see what's going on there. So I think the biggest topic really to start with is what's been going on with the now infamous White House meeting between uh, Zelensky, Trump, and Vance, and how we got a peek behind the curtain with what was going on there, and how you could see diplomacy, kind of diplomacy at its best, I would say, and how the era of closed door meetings, politics as usual, and kind of globalists trying to steamroll their agenda and trying to show a gentlemanly or civilized face to negotiations has kind of been thrown out the window, and we get to see real politic in action and see how it does look like the Trump administration is really taking what the mandate was from the American people and people that voted for Trump specifically seriously, and it's very good to see. I have never been a fan of the Ukraine war. I have not been a fan of what our government has done, how Ukraine has been seemingly used as a money laundering pit for politics as usual. How what began as a non-binding resolution for not Israel, Ukraine getting rid of its nuclear weapons has now become some sort of obligation. Which, if you look at the treaty that was signed in the 1990s, it actually doesn't put a binding agreement that if Ukraine got rid of their nuclear weapons, that the U.S. and UK would come to their defense. It actually dictates that it would go to the UN, and then the UN would decide what would happen there. So we're not on the hook with that. So I've seen that as a huge rebuttal of why the United States needs to defend Ukraine here. And let's be honest, it's total bullshit because that's not what that I believe the Budapest or the Bucharest Agreement says. And so I think that it's really, really, really interesting to see how this has gone in multiple different directions. I think based on the rants that you've seen for the past couple of weeks that I've had here, I am all for I am all for throwing a lot of the way that the status quo has been done out the window, because politicians in the United States have been stealing our taxpayer dollars in order to enrich themselves, the military industrial complex, and their cronies throughout the world for the sense of globalism. So I think that the rest of the world is going to get a rude awakening now. And even though it's a bit of a complex issue because I think that most of us can really acknowledge, especially those of you that have been keeping track of politics for the last few decades, let alone last few years, knows that essentially after World War II, the United States became the sole hegemon as far as Western values and the Enlightenment values in the entire world. We had the Soviet Union obviously raising the banner for communism in the East, and the United States took over in the West. Now, a lot of that was because the European countries were shattered after World War II. And a lot of what had happened for hundreds of years before that were because, let's be honest, we had a bunch of authoritarian regimes, empires, and kingdoms that were waving their junk around and trying to prove who had the biggest one on the table. And it was the people, the citizenry of those countries, paying the price for the incompetence and the greed and the evil of world leaders at the time. And so that's ultimately how World War One and World War Two came to be. We know that the United States got pulled into World War One, and it's very interesting because I do see some parallels between what Europe seems to be trying to do right now in trying to pull the U.S. into a full-scale war with Russia, and what most likely happened in World War One, which, for those of you that don't know, World War One essentially was the result of European governments making alliances with one another and really wanting to use their military hardware that they had spent decades building up, whether it was dreadnoughts, machine guns, or massive artillery, and really trying to show that off to flex their muscles because we had a bunch of aristocrats and empires trying to prove who was the most powerful. And that's ultimately what it came down to. And once Ferdinand was assassinated in Serbia, all hell broke loose. We know the United States tried very hard not to get involved, but we received something called the Zimmerman Note, which essentially said the Germans were trying to gear up and convince the Mexicans to invade the United States through the southern border. That's part of what pushed us in to that war. Now, I believe that the prevailing theory nowadays is that the Zimmerman note or the Zimmerman telegram was actually fabricated by the British government because they were desperate to break the stalemate in Europe. And they knew that if they got the US involved on the side of the Allies, then they would win. Not saying that the Germans were good. The Ottoman Empire was obviously horrible. But this is again, it seems to be what is going on right now here in Europe. So I do have a clip that I want to show that I think this is a multifaceted issue that we're dealing with right now because Europe has obviously started falling on the side of authoritarianism. They have a heavy influence from China. And we know that our own deep state governments have manipulated a lot of what Europe is doing. And so does the globalist cause. And I think that a lot of what's going on is the desire of the West to create a one world government and a one world paradigm here. And that members of our deep state, along with the European Union, leaders in NATO, and other countries, really want to push all of this. And because the US has been the world's hegemon now since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and because ultimately there is a one world currency called the US dollar, it's been very easy to manipulate politics in those countries to push towards an authoritarian regime. But with the rise of China, we've been seeing, and I think this is all coordinated because the Chinese are the primary enemy of the American people, not necessarily the American government until Trump took over. And they've become an example for what every government in the West wants to achieve, which is an authoritarian surveillance state, which all freedom of speech can be quashed, all freedom of religion can be quashed, and how you can try to manipulate people to just be cogs in a system and blend a pseudo capitalistic, communistic uh, economic system together. And that is something that it's very clear that the West really wants because if there's anything that they hate, is that ever since the age of the Enlightenment, and as we've really loved the empowering the individual. That is what the United States has stood for, freedom of speech, since, for the last couple of 100 years. It has become a pain in the ass for the powers that be to really control all of that. And the United States, even though we were the capitalist or the catalyst after World War II of pushing the New World Order, we've also, through our citizenry, been the barrier that has prevented that from happening. Because we do believe that, in self empowerment, we do still believe in capitalism, even though American capitalism, European capitalism, and obviously whatever China has is a perversion of capitalism and not what we really stand for. And the destruction of morality and a unified moral code and a culture in the West has led to our decline. There are still enough people in the United States that have been pushed back against this. Unfortunately for Europe, that's now an extreme minority. And because European cultures have gotten rid of their ability for their citizenry to own firearms and to see that as a fundamental God given right, it is very difficult for them to turn back. And they've also, through their governments, accepted a culture of shame for how they created empires and conquered the world at some point. And they're really going against the tenet of the sins of the father. So Europe really believes that the sins of the father are meant to punish the children. And you can see that every day with how they've allowed unfettered migration, how they've capitulated to the minority cultures which have invaded them, and how they've opened up all of their borders and also given up their sovereignty to a certain extent. And that is because the US government was more than willing to to buy European sovereignty with military power and with the US dollar being the one world currency. Now, that's benefited us in many ways as the American people, because as being the world global reserve currency, our inflation historically has been very low compared to the rest of the world. But that has also meant that the US government has been able to get off of the gold standard. We've been able to print money and we've been able to control the world through our corporations. So I think that this is kind of a side consequence of all of this. And it's going to be something that's very difficult to navigate through. But I do want to bring up this clip that I saw the other day, and I'm going to give all credit to the mod extraordinaire. I'm not sure if she is in the chat, but she brought this to my attention. And it's something that, you know, she's always brought up and known, and something that I've not done as much research on, but it really was after the fall of the Soviet Union, though we did make that agreement with Ukraine to get rid of their nuclear weapons, which they had as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union. We also did, agreed with the Russians that we would not, uh, endorse NATO expansionism, because NATO was originally created to prevent the spread of communism and the expansion of the Iron Curtain. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, it could be argued that NATO had already fulfilled their purpose. And it's ironic because this seems to be what always happens in the West with any sort of alliance rights movement or anything like that. When the goal is achieved, then the goalpost must be changed. So whether it's the NAACP, the LGBTQ movement, and everything of that sort, when they get what they want, then they have to expand it, because you've created an economy of influence with those types of organizations, and they need to find a purpose for existing. And rather than really trying to push and bring Russia into our sphere of influence, which obviously Russia is going to do what Russia does. We can't be under uh, any sort of illusion that Vladimir Putin is a good guy. He's absolutely not. At the same time, if we look at U.S. foreign policy for the past 50 or 60 years, we've done a lot of things that we shouldn't have done. And we've kind of set a horrible example and precedent for other countries to follow. as far as invading countries that we probably shouldn't have, lying about the reasoning of why we've done so, and instigating things in order for us to have an excuse to go to war. And the Western powers have done this for hundreds of years already. The French and the British are notorious for doing this. And since we essentially took up their mantle after their empires collapsed after World War I and World War II, of course we're going to perpetuate this stereotype. So I think that is one of the issues that we are dealing with today, and the chickens are coming home to roost. And rather than trying to, bring kind of a unified peace, we are kind of seeing a perpetuation of globalist ideology. So I'm going to bring up this great video from the other day where we see a little bit of what has gone on here and what the history of what has gone
the
with
propaganda
NATO
that's written about this.
And why we are where we are today.
What was Putin's intention in the war? Not the propaganda that's written about this. That they failed and he was going to take over Ukraine. The idea was to keep NATO, and what is NATO? It's the United States, off of Russia's border. No more, no less. When the Soviet Union ended in 1991, and an agreement was made that NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. Now, what happened after 1991, the United States decided there would be no end to eastward enlargement of NATO. And the decision was taken formally in 1994. When President Clinton signed off on NATO enlargement to the east, all the way to Ukraine and into Georgia. So the NATO enlargement, as you know, started in 1999 with Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic. And Russia was extremely unhappy about it. But these were countries still far from the border. So the next round of NATO enlargement came in 2004. With the 3 Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, and Slovakia. At this point, Russia was pretty damn upset. So as everybody recalls, in 2007, President Putin said, stop, enough. And of course, what that meant was in 2008, the United States jammed down Europe's throat enlargement of NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia. This is right up against Russia. And Russia protested, because if Russia decided to have a military base on the Rio Grande or the Canadian border, not only would the United States freak out, we'd have war within about 10 minutes. And a month later, a war broke out. That gets Georgia destroyed. And starting in 2010, the U.S. put in Aegis missile systems in Poland and then in Romania. And Russia doesn't like that. In 2010, Viktor Yanukovych was elected on the platform of neutrality. Russia had no territorial interests or designs in Ukraine at all. What Russia was negotiating was a 25-year lease for Sevastopol Naval Base. That's it. Not for Crimea, not for the Donbass, nothing. In 2014, the U.S. worked actively to overthrow Yanukovych. Everybody knows the phone call by my Columbia University colleague, Victoria Nuland, and the U.S. Ambassador Peter Piot. Listen to it. It's fascinating.
I don't think Cleach should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea. I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience, and, fuck the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make...
You don't get better evidence. Then came Minsk, and especially Minsk II. It said there should be autonomy for the Russian-speaking regions in the east of Ukraine. It was supported unanimously by the UN Security Council. The United States and Ukraine decided it was not to be enforced. There were many thousands of deaths in the shelling by Ukraine in the Donbass. And one of the issues on the table in December 2021, January 2022, was, does the United States claim the right to put missile systems in Ukraine? And Blinken told Lavrov in January 2022, the United States reserves the right to put missile systems wherever it wants. So the war started. What was Putin's intention in the war? It was to force Zelensky to negotiate neutrality. And that happened within 7 days of the start of the invasion. Ukraine walked away unilaterally from a near agreement. Why? Because the United States told them to. The idea was that there would be Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia that would deprive Russia of any international status by blocking the Black Sea. And the American senators, who are as nasty and cynical and corrupt as imaginable, say this is wonderful expenditure of our money because no Americans are dying. It's the pure proxy war. And since the U.S. talked the negotiators away from the table, about 1 million Ukrainians have died or been severely wounded.
So that pretty much sums up. If you want to know, this is Jeffrey Sachs. You can look up a lot of his lectures on this subject and what's been involved there. He actually has some that go on for 8 hours where he really breaks down the issue of geopolitics in Europe and the EU and how this all led up to that. Now, again, this doesn't excuse a lot of what Russia has done because Vladimir Putin is obviously former KGB and he has a way of influencing and manipulating a lot of things. But I think what it really does point to is that the United States government and our proxies within the EU and the corporations that we've used have tried to manipulate a situation to provoke Russia and some of our former enemies into what we see today to try to, try to enrich themselves. And that really is, facts have no place in this discussion. I depend on wild accusations and hyperbole. Ah, Tony, it's great to see you. It's been a long time, buddy. I appreciate you. I hope you're doing well. But that's pretty much where uh, I, that's where I am on this issue, and I think that if we look at the larger geopolitical landscape as well, I do think that what Trump is trying to play here is he's trying to. Now, you can't trust Putin. It's difficult, but if you can find any way to try to separate Russia from China, then that's something that you need to try to do. And if that ends up with the Russians trying to play both sides, that's better than Russia siding with China exclusively. And I think that in the world that we're changing now, I think we've proven with what is going on here is that without a nuclear exchange, Russia can't defeat a US led NATO. I think that's very obvious because despite the fact that they are much more powerful than Ukraine. Ukraine, which is a country with a military at this point, 1/3 of the size of Russia's, has been able to sustain this war for about 3 years. And that is with mediocre Western weaponry because it's not the best that we have to offer. It's not as if Russia is fighting against stealth aircraft or anything of that like, or even the U.S. and NATO naval forces. They are fighting against 1980s, 1990s NATO technology with granted 2025 NATO intelligence. So intelligence and logistical lines do make a huge difference in the war, and I think that that's proven that Russia really is not a threat to NATO as far as we're concerned in a conventional military perspective. So, yes, I know that this started with the taking of Crimea, during the Obama administration, and how Ukraine, started fighting the conflict in the Donbass at that time to prevent all of that. But this has been a geopolitical conflict as far as cloak and dagger for even longer than that, just because of NATO expansionism, the spycraft, and the corruption that's been going on here. Because I think that I've always believed that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the West needed to justify the military-industrial complex that we built up for the last 60 years. So after we lost the boogeyman of the Soviet Union, we still had to maintain Russia as the enemy. And we didn't want to piss off China because at the time, Western countries thought of China as a primitive slave labor. And they underestimated just how quickly and determinedly China was going to become the biggest threat to the United States that we'd ever seen, because China is a country that has long-term patience and is learning from the lessons and the mistakes of uh, the 19th century and 20th century Western colonization. So they're using a lot of the same tactics that Europe used in order to set up colonies throughout the world and exploit them. Now they're doing it. It's a neo-colonialism with using economic power and warfare by getting loans and leases and giving them to other countries. And to an extent, this is what the United States has done for the past 60 or 70 years as well. So I think that has a lot, that's influenced a lot of what they've done, plus their own 2,000-year history. So, we're seeing a lot of parallels there, and they've learned a lot of lessons. Now, being a communist and authoritarian regime, it's very difficult to really gauge just how powerful China is, whether they're a paper tiger or they're a legitimate threat. But I always go back to the parallel that industrial might and manpower tends to win a lot of wars, and China has more manpower and at this time more industrial might than any other country in the world. So for us to underestimate their power in a conflict, it would be very detrimental for us to do so. So I think that we do have to take their threat seriously, and I think that by alienating Russia into, again, this is a combination of the West trying to boogeyman Russia from the start, and Russia being its own worst enemy, because the Russians have always been a little bit duplicitous, or at least in the last 100 or 200 years, they've been duplicitous. And maybe rightfully so. They understand. They're kind of seen as like they're a European country, but the Europeans don't necessarily see them as a European country. Yes, technically they are geographically Asian, but I would say that Russian culture, Russian architecture, Russian religion, for the most part, aligns much closer with Eastern Europe than it does with the Far East in Asia. So I think that really is a huge influence there. So I've always thought that, the West should have tried harder to make sure that Russia became a successful republic and a democracy. But I think that short-term greed and short-term gains and desires, along with trying to maintain the newfound military hegemony that NATO and the United States found after 1991, was an irresistible incentive for them, and we traded you know long-term long-term strategy for inexpensive products and for the desire to spread globalism throughout the world. So I think that's my take on things. You can agree or disagree, but that really seems to be the direction that we've moved. So as far as what happened in the White House on Friday, I think it was a shocking spectacle, with what we've seen. And Den Hawken and Patriot from Warsaw. I don't know what the argument is here. I think that we all kind of agree with what is going on here, and you've got a lot of insight to things here. And the polls have dealt with a lot of what's happened with Russia, Germany, and especially with Ukraine. The polls have kind of suffered a lot of the consequences of Ukrainian duplicity in the more recent past, and obviously Russian annexation during the Soviet Union. So I think you got to respect that. And the polls, for their credit, now Tusk is a very questionable leader at this point, but I do think that of all the countries in Europe, the polls have proven that they're willing to pay their fair share, expand their military, and try harder than the rest of NATO. So I think that's something that we have to give credit to of all the EU countries that we're dealing with, and you have to understand too, a lot of the Soviet bloc countries are some of the people that do appreciate the United States and the collapse of communism more than any other country. The Western EU has kind of been isolated for years from really what communism and authoritarianism is, and that's why they've been so seduced by it. But when you look at the Eastern Bloc countries, especially the people, now the governments are being more influenced by the EU more and more every day. We saw what happened with Romania's recent election and the shenanigans that are going on. If you haven't, I recommend you to check out what happened with President Georgescu. I apologize to anybody that may speak Romanian, but I think that's a great example of what was going on there. So there is an appreciation there of more Western values and freedom because they've experienced the boot heel of communism. But regardless, I think that we should have, as the West and as the United States in particular, tried harder to bring Russia into our sphere of influence instead of allowing them to align with Russia. And then by the time that we, you know, got to where we are today, you had a strong man like Putin take over, which was inevitably going to happen, just because we had pushed them away. So I think that's a lot of what we're seeing here, and there is a very complicated history there between all of these nations, and really how Ukraine has been used by the West for money laundering. We know how the Biden crime family tried to get various deals there with with Hunter Biden and all of that in recent years, and how the Biden and by proxy the going further back, the Obama administrations had tried to influence a lot of the politics here. So Ukraine's kind of been this middle ground where there's a huge power struggle between Russia and the EU for decades now. So I think that I think it's complicated the situation. And it's created what we've seen today. But I think there's no doubt that as an American citizen, we really want to start decoupling ourselves. And I think what you saw on Friday shows a huge contrast between the globalist mindset and the America First mindset. And again, I don't know how this is going to play out. I personally agree with the America First mindset, and for any country that wants to dictate its sovereignty. Obviously, Ukraine has a right to fight for their territory and to prevent Russia from taking it over. But that doesn't mean that we as the United States needs to get involved. Because we've gotten involved in conflicts throughout the world, and that doesn't mean that that's something that we should or have to do, um, especially if it's not in our own self-interest. And I think that that's really the bigger problem that we're dealing with right now. Is this a war where we really have our own self-interest involved? Is Europe a good is Europe and the EU a good partner to the United States right now when they've been moving more and more towards authoritarianism, when they've allowed Islamic extremism to really embed itself within their societies? And really, when they've had a viewpoint that is very anti-American for decades. And it's understandable because what our government has done, but that's not something that was necessarily espoused by the American people. And I think that's kind of the greater conflict that we're dealing with today. It is the fact that the American people have woken up to the corruption of our own government and its imperialistic and globalist tendencies, and we're not going to take responsibility for it. We're not, because just as everyone else around the world has been deceived, so have we. So I think the American mentality right now is we're rectifying our mistakes with allowing an authoritarian government that has been using the intelligence agencies to run rampant throughout the world and that has, sacked our taxpayer dollars to push an agenda that we don't agree with. But we're not going to pay the price for it either. Now, I don't know if that's something that we'll fully be able to reconcile, but I understand the mentality and I do agree with it because we didn't vote for our country, our government to do what it's done, which is to potentially run child trafficking rings through Epstein. Now that's an accusation, speculation, but we're pretty sure that's true. To start foreign wars, to expand NATO the way that it has, to lie, cheat, steal, and manipulate, and to collapse governments that are stable throughout the world. We've never tried to do that. And that's not something that we've espoused to. And the American people certainly haven't gained the benefit of that. When we see that, Europe has a welfare state and a social safety net where they have the luxury of having 35-hour work weeks, having universal health care, and not spending any money or spending a low percentage of their GDP on the military. And yes, our government has given us security, so to speak, but we've also wasted blood, sweat, and tears and treasure on perpetuating this system throughout the world. And now we're tired of it, and we've exposed it, we see what it's all about, and we don't want to deal with it anymore. And now simultaneously, you go on Twitter, you see these news agencies, you see Europeans simultaneously calling Americans stupid for not getting better benefits, but at the same time saying that we can't just give up our protections of them. It's like you can't have it both ways, neither can the European countries. They're going to have to start giving up a lot of what they've gained in order to defend themselves now and to spend more on their militaries because you cannot have both. You have to balance everything out. And this is something that they're going to start learning soon. And frankly, we're sick and tired of it in the United States. We are. And you could see from the tone of the Oval Office meeting that, you know, Zelensky is looking for military assurances from the United States, and that's not something we're going to give him because Ukraine is not a NATO country. And we're also starting to see from European countries that it looks like we're starting to get set up. And my biggest fear is that we're going to see countries like the UK and France put their troops in Ukraine in the hopes that Russia will launch a strike that will get European troops killed, and then they can cry Article 5 and expect us to come and save them. That's bullshit. And if we find out that that is the motivation, then the United States must absolutely leave NATO because we're not going to accept this type of blackmail that's going to get our men and children, our men and women killed and our economy destroyed for what? Globalist ambitions? And here's the problem once again, because yes, Russia is not nearly as militarily powerful on a conventional basis as they've seemed to be. And I think this war has proven it. But the problem is because they are not, they are more likely to use weapons of mass destruction out of desperation in order to stop NATO from getting into their territory. And we know that this is what the Europeans want at this point. They want blackmail. They want this to go on. What's the motivation behind it? Is it to expand their power? Is it to expand their influence? It could be a lot of things. I think that there's many different levels to what is going on here. I think it's the desire for a one world government. I think if you want to get really conspiratorial, depopulation could be a huge motivation behind it. I think that trying to get rid of a lot of the people that are freedom minded is one of that. That's why they've had their mass immigration to try to bring in a serf population that doesn't believe in Western values that can be easily controlled. So I think that this is all motivations and also to have a smokescreen for the mistakes that Europeans have used. And I have another great clip from Michael Schellenberger that explains a lot of this as well. And I think it's worth watching. And it really explains kind of the American perspective of all of this. So let's bring this up and we will check this out. Oh my gosh, the memes here are so fiery that I wish I could I wish I could show the memes here. But they're out of control. So let's see. I'm gonna bring up this clip right here from Michael Schellenberger. Kind of sums up how I think most Americans feel, and I think this is pretty fair.
There's something I need to say, and I need to be blunt. So let me start by saying I love Europe. Truly love Europe. I love visiting Europe. I love Europeans. I have European friends.
Now, for those of you that don't know, Michael Schellenberger is a journalist, and he's actually the journalist who broke the story that elements of the FBI and the field office in New York were deleting documents related with the Epstein files that led to Pam Bondi kind of the entire debacle that happened this week, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Respect the relationship we've had for a really long time. You Europeans do not respect Americans. You can protest and say, no, we love America. No, you don't. We know you look down on us. You think you're better than us. And in some ways you are. You know, you work 35 hours a week. You have longer vacations. You've got this magnificent culture. We get it. But any relationship in which one side doesn't respect the other can't last. This thing where Ukraine comes to the White House and acts like it can tell us what we should do, that's not what the relationship is. This thing where somehow we're on the hook, including for countries that are not in NATO, that was never the deal. Ukraine is not part of NATO. We were never obligated to protect Ukraine. Maybe that was something that Europe wants to do. Great. Europe should go protect Ukraine. We have no NATO agreement with Ukraine. And this thing where then Zelensky then goes and quotes all these other European leaders. They're with me, not with the United States. Great. Go work together. We have 100,000 Americans being killed by the Chinese and Mexican fentanyl and methamphetamine mafias every year. Our kids are not learning to read. We have thousands of veterans with PTSD and are hurting. We have been at war in the Middle East for a quarter century. It's been 80 years since we bailed out Europe. You have your own militaries. You have your own nuclear weapons. I've been trying to be really indirect about this for years. I've been trying to be soft pedaling that you guys don't get it. Europeans do not get it. You guys think that this relationship is going to last forever. You think that because something's written down on a piece of paper, it's going to last forever. Americans have voted against this multiple times. It doesn't matter. This is not about what you think of Trump or like Trump. People on the left, on the right, they do not want to be in a nuclear war with Russia. How can we explain this to you? We do not want to continue to be in the Ukraine war. We want peace. Our natural inclination is to actually not get involved in conflicts in Europe and Asia. We didn't want to have to continue to intervene after World War II. I get it. But times have changed. We're ready to move on. And we bear a lot of responsibility for this. The United States bears a lot of responsibility for this. Our people, our administrations, our think tanks told Zelensky and told the Europeans that, we were loyal to that alliance, that we were going to stick with them. No, that's not, the American people are not on board with that. This is not, again, the left has traditionally been against those kinds of military entanglements. Now the right is, but a lot of the left is too. A lot of Democrats, a lot of liberals. I would love an orderly transition here, but the behavior that we're seeing coming out of European leaders and out of Zelensky just now in the Oval Office suggests that the relationship is over. We'll reset the relationship afterwards. We can have a trade. We're going to visit each other. It's great. But this thing of this entitlement, I don't think Europeans understand how angry it makes us. I don't think Europeans really understand how much Americans want to deal with our problems. We go to Europe. You have universal health care. You work 35 hours a week. You retire at a young age. You don't work nearly as hard as we do in the United States. You have many more benefits, in large part because we pay for all of your security, or a large part of it. And in return, we just get disrespect, entitlement, like we're like your children, and this is a dysfunctional relationship. It needs to end. It needs to change. Okay, maybe there's a transition period, something, but this is gone too far. And I think that the anger that you saw in the White House with Trump and Vance, with Zelensky holding his arms, rolling his eyes, acting like he was telling us what the deal was, no. That's not a Republican, Democrat, whatever thing. That is not how we're going to be treated by people that we're helping. So it's time to grow up. It's time for the relationship to change.
There you go, Michael Schellenberger. He really just articulated it better than I could have said it, and he's a great follow on X, so I would check that out. Again, thanks to Carla for pointing that out to me and for bringing it up. She's done a great job on this subject and bringing it to my eyes. So I appreciate that. Thank you if you're out there um, lurking in the chat. So, but I've watched Michael for a couple of years now. He's been on various podcasts. I believe he's been on Tucker Carlson, and I think he's been on Glenn Beck's show a few times. So he really does great journalism. He has excellent sources, and he really just brought it home right there that we're sick and tired of what has been going on. And I do understand once again that this is a creation of our own doing. And by ours, I mean our government. But we're tired of it because so much that we've been taught, we have been manipulated as the American people. The American people are almost like, I think an analogy, a strange analogy would be that the American people in many ways are like that wife she's not sure what her husband does during the day, but he comes back, he's got a good job, but you don't realize that he's like in the mafia or something like that in organized crime. So he's out there like busting kneecaps, intimidating people, laundering money and all this stuff, but he comes home, he brings home the bacon, says that he's got like an insurance job in the day, and everybody's just like, oh right, this is great, like my kids are being provided for, and we're living a good life. But I think after a while, especially the last few decades, a lot of that started bleeding through, and we started realizing, like, wait a second, when we go out, everybody says that this guy's an asshole, and I'm starting to pay the price for it. It's like, what's the deal? And then now we started looking through the records, and it's like, holy crap, this dude's been doing some shady stuff the entire time. This is terrible. And then you realize that they were the bad guys all along. And, in a sense, you're looking to extricate that situation. You want a divorce from that. And I think that that's what the American people have desired. And, for a long time, people that were waking up to this were called the conspiracy theorists. No, of course not. You're crazy. I was never doing any of that. You're absolutely bizarre for thinking that, or absolutely insane. No, it turns out that we were right all along. And just like having that bubble burst of like finding out that your significant other has been doing terrible things behind your back, even though supposedly they were giving you the benefit of it. Uh, it's very painful to kind of see that, and you're seeing it, especially I think the older generations had a hard time accepting that. So the boomer generations, Gen X, not all of them, obviously, some of them knew from the start, but I think it's been more difficult for them to accept, whereas kind of the millennials, especially older millennials, we've kind of been cynical because we saw a lot of what was going on. We were raised in this politically incorrect era of the early 2000s. Then Obama came in and told everyone that they were racist and blew up the entire Tea Party movement. The Occupy Wall Street movement was originally kind of a tripartisan movement. And what I mean by tripartisan is you had Tea Partiers, you had anti war liberals, and you had libertarians kind of combining forces against the collusion of corporations and the government, and wanting to expose that. And then the progressive globalist authoritarian powers kind of came in, smashed that, and then exploited the liberal wing and took them over and turned the Democrats into full-blown communists, pulled the neocons along with them, and it became a uniparty structure, which it probably was a uniparty structure all along. And then, freedom-loving individuals and, blue collar workers, mainline conservatives, and libertarians got kind of like thrown to the wayside. And we're like, what the hell just happened? Like, I don't even know what this is. And then they started pushing, social experimentation, like the gender ideology stuff, race baiting, and all of that as a smokescreen to cover what they were actually doing, which was trying to control the entire world. So I was like, I, I think that that is what we've been seeing, and Trump is the backlash to all of that because we want to go to a time, and maybe this time never existed because we know that we've been manipulated now with social media. So a lot of times we do have to be careful when we look at nostalgia because a lot of that was an illusion created by the government and giving us lives that we thought were real while they were going throughout the globe and doing some shady stuff and kind of creating the foundations of the new world order that we see today. But I think we do want to go towards being patriotic, between having American values and working hard, caring about the individual, having a moral code, being honorable, and also staying out of other people's business, at least until we get our own house in order. Obviously, I think it's okay for America to be a charitable nation. I think that goes with our Judeo-Christian values, where we do want to help those that are in need and that are suffering throughout the world, but not when we have people in the United States suffering. When we've got veterans on the streets suffering from PTSD, when we have hundreds of thousands of people dying from fentanyl that's being shipped in from China through the drug cartels, when we have extremism breeding in our schools, when we have ideology poisoning our children and getting them to sterilize themselves and confuse what a man is and what a woman is. We have a lot of serious problems here. And until we get our house in order, we can't possibly expect to help anyone else. And we also can't spread our values because what values do we have if this is what we have here as an example that we can't even put in order? We have nothing to export. So we really have to clean house to an extent within our government and our society and then get back on track with what it means to be an American and what do we actually stand for which is truth, justice, freedom, and the American way. Now I'm being a little bit facetious there, but really go back to our foundational principles in the Constitution and our moralistic values. And until we do that, we can't expect to be a proper leader in the world. We have to lead by an example. So I think that, you know, what we're seeing now is obviously a drastic shakeup of the powers that be in the world order that has reigned supreme since the end of World War II. And there's going to be a lot of pushback because there's a lot of money and power invested in that. And one of the things that we do need to be careful of is our desire for independence and our desire to get off of globalism. If it's done the wrong way and if we don't quickly pivot to American industry taking over and us becoming self sufficient, it can harm us to an extent. Now, some of this may be inevitable because we've spent the last 100 years kind of becoming a globalized society rather than being independent nations that traded, in a lot of luxury goods and expertise to now being wholly dependent on countries that hate us for both basic resources and advanced technology. And I think that's a serious problem when the United States used to be essentially not just the breadbasket of the world, but the factory of the entire world and the innovators of the entire world. And we became complacent. Now we're a society of thinkers only, and not even really thinkers, just propagandistic entertainment to to a certain extent. And we need to go back to being a nation of innovators, of engineers, of farmers, of hardworking folks, and becoming self-sufficient. I think Elon Musk helps a lot with some of this, with giving inspiration to a lot of young people as far as the innovation side of things. Maybe not being a father, but that goes without saying. And I'm not crazy about AI, but it's something that it's going to happen inevitably. So you've got to. It's one of those things that you either you've got to accept it and be wary of it and warn people about it, but it's going to happen whether you want it to or not. Um, but always be skeptical of things that just don't seem right. But pushing pride in being American, uh, you know, working with our hands, innovating and bringing things back here, especially when it comes to food supply, pharmaceuticals, and computer technology. There's no reason why the U.S. shouldn't be making its own computer chips. But we're getting them from Taiwan, so now we have to worry about the Chinese invading Taiwan. There's no reason why we should be exporting most of our food away. And if you don't know, basically all the big pork providers in this country are owned by the Chinese at this point. How's that possible? A lot of our agricultural land is being sold to foreign companies and foreign countries. How is that possible? We're getting rid of a lot of our strategic resources because we've allowed greed and a globalist mindset to spread rather than pride in the United States, pride in the American people, and looking out for ourselves. It doesn't mean that we don't trade internationally, but we really do need to have some sort of propriety and loyalty to our own nation where we're from. Because if not, everyone else is just going to come and rip our resources off of us. And I think this is a serious problem that we have where companies have moved, and I'm not sure what we do. See, this is where we get into a struggle, especially as somebody who's capitalistic and has libertarian tendencies. How do we how do we balance that economic mindset with also the realities of a global marketplace and competition between nations? Because libertarianism, as Americans know it, fails when you have a country like China, because we have a certain moral code and standards. And I think most American libertarians would agree with this, that we don't want to use slave labor is absolutely wrong. Property rights and the rights of the individual are something that we agree with. Well, when we compete against a country that uses child and essentially slave labor and that is ripping the organs out of people and selling them on the black market, which is spreading diseases as biological weapons throughout the world, we can't deal with that country on an equal economic playing ground. We can't. And it's naive to think that we can. So I'm definitely more of the type of, I believe in libertarianism and capitalism within the United States borders, but when we're dealing with foreign countries, there have to be protections put in place. I think that's just being logical, because if you can't have a proper agreement with another country where they respect your rules, then you're just not going to win. Because in a sense, uh, what are we saying here? We're saying, well, these guys are going to deal with us, right? Okay, so we set the rules that we're going to have a duel. And so we're going to walk 10 paces and then we turn around and we fire a shot. But we're dealing with countries that the minute that we turn our backs, they're going to shoot us in the back of the head, literally, figuratively and literally. So you can't work with people that deal in bad faith. You can't do that. And we also can't deal with people who are creating inferior products and that want to undermine us because they want revenge for things that happened 1 or 200 years ago in the Chinese. So we have to really focus on ourselves, bettering ourselves, finding our moral code and our moral value and getting right. And then we can really start dealing with everybody else. Now we can give food, we can trade our technology, and things like that, our culture, our innovations that we have, and we can try to better mankind as we should, but we can't be fleeced or undermined. We really can't be. And that is something that we need to work on. And I don't think that that conflicts with any of our previous values or why or how this country was founded. I can see many of you are talking about the Bible, and I agree with that. Um, I don't think that we can go out throughout the world if we treat our families badly. And that's what we're doing. We're treating the American people badly. And, I'm not a person that wants people to rely on welfare or anything like that. But if you're going to tell me to choose between sending military aid to foreign countries and getting fleeced so that, American companies can take advantage of slave labor throughout the world versus giving the family around the corner a safety net to be able to survive because of what globalism has wreaked upon them because they can't get a job, then I'm going to vote to help my fellow neighbor. I am. That's just common sense. So, this is where we need to start shifting our paradigm here about who we're trying to help and who we stand for and what we stand for. Because on the one hand, we can't say that we're all for, bombing other countries, but I'm not for helping the American people. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So you have to have a balanced approach here and a balanced economic approach. And, a lot of this is idealistic anyway. Why? Because humans are imperfect. So communism is impossible. Pure capitalism is impossible. We have to work within the realm of human reality. And that is that we can have a capitalistic society where we compete and where we have a free market. At the same time, that doesn't come at the expense of individual humans being exploited for their labor, or to have wages that are too low for them to survive because we want to get cheaper products that are inferior. They're inferior in quality. I think we've also moved from a society of craftsmanship that cares about the quality of our goods. How many, and living here in Puerto Rico has kind of made me see this because Puerto Rico's very poor compared to the rest of the United States. It would be one of the poorer states if we were to become a state. But a lot of people here have older products, right? And you can go to a house that was built 50, 60, 70 years ago with old appliances that are still working. And then you buy a new TV, you buy a new refrigerator, you buy a new car, and it falls apart. And you can't tell me that we haven't been able to figure things out. It's because there's planned obsolescence. So, that's a shortcoming of the society that we live in, that we see inferior quality products, whether they're produced in the United States, whether they're produced in Mexico, whether they're produced in China. Yes, we can get things cheaper, but that's because they want us to buy new things every year. And that's also a society of pushing people to spend more and more and more and not care about actually living their lives in a way that is about saving money, being responsible, looking out for your family. It's a society of disposable products. And I think that that is a huge problem. So this is something that we're going to have to figure out. And right now, I think that Americans have made their voices pretty clear, and that is we care about America first and getting our house in order, and the rest of the world is going to suffer the consequences. And we do need to build up our domestic industries because since we have coupled the U.S. dollar to being essentially the global currency, we always talk about as Americans we don't want a one world currency. We essentially do have one, and that is the U.S. dollar. And the moment that and part of the reason why the US dollar is the global reserve currency is because we've expanded our military throughout the globe. So if anybody asks to collect on the money, we're going to tell them to F off because we've got military bases right on their border or inside their own countries. So as we start cutting back on that and creating more domestic resources, there will be a shock to the system. And the other problem that we're going to have is companies that are American companies that have become now global corporations, where are their loyalties going to lie? What are they going to decide to do? Now, with Trump's tariff system, and tariffs are how we used to do things before we had an income tax. Now, all taxation is theft, but we also, I think we've kind of agreed that anarchy and an extreme libertarianism viewpoint is not going to work. It's not. It's not. We need a balance of certain things. So you do have to have a basic small government because you got to have borders, you have to have certain protections, and you do have to have at least some sort of unified currency within a territorial area, or at least an agreement of like, okay, we're going to trade this way. We accept that this has some sort of value here. This is a tale as old as time, right? It's even biblical to an extent of how much things are worth and how we are going to trade, and that we have a system of laws and that we have rights given to us by God and our creator, or just by existing. We've already agreed to these things. So you need to have at least some sort of system or authority that is going to espouse these things. And that's just how humans are. Look, we're hierarchical. There's no way that you're going to agree to an anarchistic household where the parents let the children run amok. Ironically, this is kind of like what the left does, where it's like kids can vote, they can do whatever they want, and it causes chaos, and we're going to let them change their genders and do all these things. That doesn't work. So you're going to have a slightly authoritarian household that has the parents as the leaders of the household, and they're going to teach their children about their moral values. This is just how humans are. This is how it's always been. We are hierarchical. Anarchy does not work. Pure authoritarianism doesn't work. You need to have a balance. I think the founders did a pretty good job, but that can't exist without a moral code, and that is based on our Judeo-Christian principles. You know, if you look back to the Ten Commandments, if you look at the things that the Bible says, whether you like it or not, these are things that we have based Western society on. And I think Western society has been trying to find a replacement for those principles, and it's led to chaos. And that's why the West has also been falling apart, because you can't replace universal truths with constructs that they've tried to create. So you have to have some sort of basis for things. And ultimately, that comes to having a moral code and having a basic set of standards. So you don't want it to become convoluted. That's what's happened here with the bureaucratic state. I think that we do need to dismantle most of the federal government. Most of it is bloated and has no accountability. We need to bring things to be more local, but this is also going to require that too many of us act as if the government is on autopilot and we don't get involved with it at all, but we have to. In the past, that's how people were. It's called civic duty. And it's not that you're required to do anything, but if you want to have skin in the game, you have to get involved in the game. You got to play whether you want it or not. And that is something that we failed to do, because life is not easy. Maintaining your freedom isn't free. It is not. Because if you just want to sit home and be like, I've worked really hard, I've gotten off my shift, I'm responsible with my money, I'm just going to chill out, do whatever I want, or just keep working all the time and just keep accumulating wealth. I'm not going to pay attention to what the city council does. I'm not going to pay attention to the schools. I'm not going to pay attention to elections. You are going to fail, because they will take other people that don't want to work as hard as you, will join the power systems that exist right now, and they will take away your stuff, or they will put barriers to entry because they may be jealous that you started your own business that's doing well. So they're going to get involved with government, whether you want to get involved with it or not, to create regulations that will cripple you or that will tax you and take away your wealth. So you must be involved in order to protect yourself and to protect the freedoms that we stand for. And I think that is where a lot of conservatives and libertarians have absolutely failed. That we hate government so much sometimes that we don't want to be involved in it. Well, guess what? The government is going to exist whether you want it or not, because even humans have tribes. Again, it goes back down to the family unit. Humans organize in a hierarchical manner. We are a pack animal. We have a pack mentality. So we are going to organize. We're going to create neighborhoods. We're going to create towns. We're going to create cities. We're going to create nations. And so if you're not willing to at least participate in that on a basic level, even if your basic level is, I'm getting involved to make sure that they have less involvement, you still have to have some sort of skin in the game. And that is something that we need to be better at. And to a certain extent, too, we do need to take up the mantle of where our values come from. And now I'll get on a little bit of a, if you're not a Christian, I'm not going to apologize for this. I am a Christian, but if we don't want the government to get involved in a huge welfare state or scheme, then we need to get more involved in our communities. We need to do more to help people in need ourselves. We must be more charitable as a society. We need to do more to help the homeless, to help people in need, so that they don't turn to a government safety net and that we continue to give the government more and more power. Because our lack of charity, our lack of holding churches accountable for doing more in our societies and in our communities allows the government to come into that vacuum and take control. And this is also what has allowed the left to dominate for years. Because if we as Christians and as conservatives don't do more to help our communities, maybe some of us do, a lot of us don't. There are a lot of people who are hypocrites. Then we will lose that ground to government organizations and private organizations that will take that and take advantage of it and use it to control people. So if we don't do it out of the kindness of our own hearts to help people, even from a mentorship perspective as well, this goes to sometimes we are a little bit heartless in the sense that, how many times have you heard, well, I busted my ass and I did this. That means you can do it too. So I really don't give a crap. I don't feel bad for you at all. Some people aren't as smart as other people. Some people didn't have the benefit of look, everybody starts off on a different level, right? You may come from a poor family, you may come from a rich family, you may come from a family where, one of your parents is gone for whatever reason. They got divorced, somebody died. Maybe you have horrible family who's on drugs or something like that. Take into account that people do come from different backgrounds. So you should try to pay it forward. So if you're successful and you've got the time to help and mentor somebody else, you should definitely do it, because it's only going to help society. And then at least you can kind of also push some of your values out there and create more like-minded people that would also potentially go out into society and vote for things that you agree with. If we sit in our little silos and we're like, I don't care about this guy because I'm doing well for myself, these people are assholes over here, or they're idiots, or they're lazy, or whatever, then we're just going to isolate ourselves and we will be picked off one by the people who are actually collectivists or the people that are manipulating others to join their collective. So this is something that we need to do. This is literally what we are based off of. And the founders, many of them warned us that the only way that the United States works and the Constitution works is if we hold ourselves to that standard, because we have enough rope to hang ourselves. And having freedom doesn't mean that you have a freedom of responsibility, that you can act in a decadent way, that you can act in a duplicitous way, that greed should be your motive for things. No, freedom is that you have the free will to make decisions that are difficult. And at the end of the day, you have to choose to be good. And you have the choice to be good or bad. You do. But if you're bad, it's going to have some serious consequences. Maybe not in society, maybe you can get away with it, but it will eat at your soul and it will also rot away society. Because as more and more people are corrupted and get into positions of power, that permeates throughout the entire system and rots it from within. So we have to choose to be good and righteous people, to be honorable, to be people of our word, and we need to do all of this. And that is something that we need to do. We can't be naive about it. You don't want people to take advantage of you, but at the same time, we have to set that example. We do. Some people will be bad no matter what. That is the way that it is. It's absolutely true. And many people do take advantage of the charitable nature that we have. But you have to take control of your charity as well. So don't rely on the government uh, to spend your money wisely. They're not. So we have to vote to have a smaller government, but then that means that we should go out into our communities and try to help people out. We really should. And we've seen this through periods of national crisis, whether it's natural disasters, September 11th, things like that. The American people are fantastic. Look at what happened after Hurricane Helene and how we saw communities come together and private organizations come, whether it was religious charities, um, people, influencers online, or just normal Joe Schmo with a pickup truck trying to help their fellow man out. Happened in LA too, happened in Maui. This is something that we need to really take control of ourselves because we have more skin in the game. And it gives us a tie to our people. Sometimes America is too big and we forget about what's going on and we're unsympathetic towards one another. And that's something that we need to turn from. And the internet is a huge part of that because the internet seems to show the worst examples of humanity. So I think this will segue into kind of my next thing. And, I kind of went on a long rant there. Didn't even show clips of Trump and JD with Zelensky, but I think pretty much got the gist of it. And if you haven't seen them already on other channels or other news organizations, you can find it easily. You don't need to watch it here. I'm just giving my 2 cents. So let me say hello to everybody. I do see some people that I haven't seen uh, that often, but Night Train, Den Hawk Tua, Joe C, Lions Den, Blue Shell. We've got A2, JM the Elite Fan, Cerberus, Clinton, Novella Princess, JXD. I haven't seen you before. Patriot from Warsaw. Uh, Tony was here earlier. Kylie Leone was here. So thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate you all. We're going to move on to the next things. Look at that. Joe C says, I got 4 kids and 12 grandchildren. I got a lot of skin in the game for the future of our nation. God bless you, Joe. That's something to be extremely proud of. That's fantastic. You've done your part. And I appreciate you gifting the memberships when you get a chance. That's awesome. So, and it looks like you said that Trump sent Stryker force units down to Mexico. Man, what's going to happen in the border is going to be crazy, and we have to be prepared for that too. I think there's going to be things are going to get spicy. The cartels are going to be dangerous. I don't think it's going to be. We can't underestimate them, especially with some of the hardware that they've gotten. Supposedly, a lot of the weaponry that we sold to Ukraine or that we gave to Ukraine has gone on the black market, and the cartels may have some of it. The cartels have some crazy dudes. I think that they're not going to be like dealing with Islamic extremists or religious extremists where they're going to be willing to die, but there's some pretty savage dudes. And I think until we really show them our resolve, they may try some shenanigans that are going to be pretty brutal that will shock a lot of the American people. So we need to be prepared for that. So, but this is again, we are dealing with so many things right now. And I think this is why Trump is doing what he has to do now. I think, and I know this from sources within the government because I do know people that work within the government who have been trying very hard to expose some of the waste in the government and also work against the waste, people who are honorable, people who've been in the military as well, and who've done a good job. And I do think that Doge and all these cuts, you need to find the people that are good to help you really dismantle the government and to downsize it. And you need to keep people that are good. Some people have been there for a long time, they've been doing a great job. You should really consider keeping those people or moving them to different departments. And some people that are new are fantastic and they've gone in for honorable reasons. So I think you've got to make sure that you're keeping good people, getting rid of bad people, and eliminating redundancy. And I do think that a lot of what we're seeing in the government too is that we had a lot of bad leadership that permeated and hired people for bad reasons. And so you have some people that were doing their job, but their leaders were making them do stuff that was bullshit, let's be honest, or work busy work. So they were doing their jobs, they got hired, they're doing the right thing as far as they know, but the powers that be brought them in to do something that's completely unnecessary. So there should be something. I think Trump with the severance pay of 8 months, I think that's a great start. There should probably be job fairs and things like that because we also don't want like a huge vengeful unemployment line going on here. So I think there's a way that you can do it, and maybe we'll see more of that. At the same time, the bureaucratic state is so embedded, and I understand that there's a lot of corruption and people trying to sabotage things, that it's going to be a difficult balance, especially with Trump only having 3.5 years. CNT Design and Arms, what's up, buddy? Good to see you. Glad you could make it tonight. So let's move on to the Epstein list. Now, I mean, I'll be honest. If you've seen some of my tweets, I've been a bit snarky about this lately because one of the things that is the difference between people who are, I guess, on this side of the aisle, I don't even know what it means to be a true conservative or Republican anymore, whatever you want to call it, and people who vote for the Democrats, and maybe that's really how it is right now, is that we have a tendency, at least I know I do, I can speak for myself, to hold the people on our side more accountable. So you've heard me in the past complain about how Trump was not very pro Second Amendment, especially in his first term. Take the guns first, due process second, red flag laws, all that bullshit. Horrible job on his part. Not very pro Second Amendment. So I'm going to call him out on that. I'm also going to say, when he does good, the border, how he's handled international relations, trying to get us out of foreign wars, all good stuff. I appreciate that. So the entire Epstein list, it's just been a fiasco, right? Because I think what happened on Thursday was very poorly done. Now, if you need to, let's look through a few different scenarios here, right? So we know that that Trump came out with an executive order a few weeks ago to reveal the JFK papers, RFK papers, and MLK papers. We're still waiting on that stuff. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna has created a task force within the House of Representatives to also start looking at that, looking at those files and investigating all of this. Kash Patel obviously has advocated for years on the exposure of the Epstein list and bringing that to light. Donald Trump ran on that. A huge portion of freedom-minded individuals, influencers, people on the internet, really, conspiracy theorists, whatever you want to call all of us, all of the above. We've been wanting to see this for years because we know that this is going to be the can of worms that reveals a lot of the corruption within the political sphere of the world, the intelligence agencies, the entertainment industry, all of the above. Basically, the global elites, so to speak. So I think that, when you come in and you run on this, you expect results, right? And I can understand where, if you've seen the list, here's a few things that I'm going to start with the good things, and then I'm going to go to the bad. So let's say that you have the Epstein list, and you look at it. there's going to be a few things that you possibly see based on the knowledge that we have of who Epstein was involved with, what organizations we think are involved with the Epstein client list, and just what we've seen from the court cases, what we've heard from Ghislaine Maxwell's case, and the fact that most of us believe that Epstein didn't kill himself and that this was all a setup. And then we take also what's going on with P. Diddy, which is related in its own way as well. There is a huge chance that when you look at that list, the names on it are going to be so prominent that you understand that, first of all, if you want to bring some of these people to justice, you got to set things up in a certain way because these are going to be extremely rich and powerful people. Now, somebody the other day made a comment when I started talking about this that, well, if these people know they're on the list, they would have already found ways to protect themselves and to run away. So I don't think that's true because I also believe that, look, most of the people in the bureaucratic deep state did not believe that Donald Trump was going to win this election. It's the same people that made sure he was not going to win in 2020. So we saw that they tried to kill the man twice. They tried to rig this election. They definitely did so in 2020. And at least I believe so. You may believe otherwise. That's fine. Um, so, knowing all of that, we know that we're dealing with extremely powerful people that are going to stop at nothing. So they also thought that they were going to win. So I don't see why those people feel like they need to run away and they're not going to quit. So they're extremely powerful. They're going to stand their ground and they're basically going to fight until the end to make sure that they win this. Now, I also think a lot of that evidence has probably been destroyed, like you guys are bringing up right now. I think if we still do have a lot of evidence, which we may, because let's say that there are the intelligence agencies are involved, they're going to want to keep and maintain that leverage. So I think that when you look at that, there's still probably a lot out there. Somebody's got it, I think. It's a volatile resource, and it would have been useful to keep around to blackmail people. But let's say that you did see the list and you've got CEOs, major politicians and world leaders, intelligence agencies, innovators, celebrities, all this stuff. I want that to be released at all costs. However, I could see how somebody looks at this list and they're like, holy crap. Once we release this, this is basically going to cause an economic crash. It's going to cause a crash because you can imagine that if the major banks have their CEOs, they get exposed, their leadership, if all these politicians do that, people are going to run wild. They're going to lose faith. You're going to have people running for the hills. You're going to have stock prices dropping. You're going to have all this stuff go down. And if you find out that it's hundreds of people and they're all the top men and women in industry and in politics, that now you feel like you have, what am I going to do here? Now, I think they've got to release it no matter what. That's what I would do. Because again, you can't let this shit go. You can't let this shit continue on. You can't. Even if it is going to cause extreme pain and some sort of economic consequences, it's going to be that way forever. These people are just going to keep getting away with stuff. They're going to keep hurting innocent children. They're going to keep trafficking humans, and this will never end. So you must have consequences for them. So I think that they've got to do it. But I can understand why they may have been afraid to do it right away. Okay, let's give them that. So if I'm Pam Bondi, she made a terrible mistake. Let's give her a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Let's Pam Bondi's actually in her 60s. She may look fantastic for her age, but she's a little bit of a boomer. She's got some boomeritis going. So let's say that she'd gotten a lot of these documents last week. She jumped the gun on Fox News the previous Friday. So not this past Friday, the Friday before that, saying, I got it on my desk right now. We're going to release it next week. So until she knew what she had and realized that it really wasn't that much that we hadn't seen before, because there were some newer details, but it didn't really expose anything, then she should have kept quiet about it. She said, look, she should have said something like, we're getting all the information. We're going to release the list as soon as we've got everything. We're kind of dealing with sources within the government that are being resistant, and we're trying to make sure that the people that are undermining this stuff come to justice. She kind of did that on Thursday, but she should have never jumped the gun. Thursday rolls around. They invite all these journalists and influencers from the right to the White House for a separate event to talk about how they're going to change the way that media coverage goes down in the White House. And then they drop this binder off of them. They lead them out to the back of the Oval Office. The media is there. And from what I heard from a few of them now, some of them, a lot of people obviously don't have sympathy for them because they're influencers and all this stuff. Some of them, like the Mike Cernoviches of the world, Mike Cernovich was actually involved with pretty much getting the original Epstein story to break along with the Miami Herald several years ago. So, obviously this is somebody who's pretty invested in the story. His theory was that Pam Bondi made some promises last week. She realized that she couldn't hold up to those promises once she looked up through the files, panicked, and then released what she had, wrote that letter to Kash Patel, wanted to make it public, but then rather than just coming out with that as a press release and putting all that out there, they used the influencers and the media personalities that were at the White House to kind of get it out there, but also put them on a media embargo. So I think that that's kind of a bit of what may have happened here. Some people are speculating that she wanted to put pressure on the SDNY. Maybe that's possible, but there was no raid on the SDNY offices the next day. I haven't heard about heads rolling or anything like that. So I don't really know where this is or what's going on. And that's a serious problem and something that is going to be a major headache for the Trump administration going forward. And if it is something that they don't rectify, or if they can't supply evidence that the deep state has essentially eliminated this list, which that could be a valid excuse. We know, again, they tried to make sure that Trump could never be in a position of power again. It is not out of the realm of possibility that they would have tried to destroy anything incriminating in order to prevent him from using it against them and shifting the power structures in this country. I think at some point you're going to have to admit it, and you're going to have to be completely transparent. And throwing a bunch of influencers out there to the wolves and making them look like they're a bunch of glory hounds, making you look like you're incompetent, was the wrong thing. So I think that this is a serious problem. It's going to call into question people within the Trump administration, and it is going to hurt their credibility. Matt Gaetz, I don't know. I don't know if Matt Gaetz. I mean, the problem with Matt Gaetz is that he's kind of already admitted that if Matt Gaetz didn't do some of the things that he's being accused of, he would have sued the witnesses against him for defamation already. And he's kind of admitted that he did shenanigans when he was younger. So I think Matt Gaetz, the problem is that in some things, some of the things that Epstein Island went down with, he was some of the things he's done are almost parallel to some of those actions. Going out with extremely young women, things like that, partying, doing drugs. Like in a way, it's like I don't know. And look, I've liked a lot of the things that Matt Gaetz said, but I think that there's more reasons why Matt Gaetz wasn't allowed there, and that wasn't that. I think it's just almost like he's almost the type of person that may have actually been involved in that type of situation. That's just me. Some people may not like that. I liked Matt Gaetz for a long time, but the more that I've seen and heard from it, and even heard some of his own statements about it and how he's kind of not really pushed legally against it, it kind of tells me that he's just taken the L and moved on to his private media career. Bondi, Bondi's problem was that she was involved in a lot of the stuff that led to red flag laws and to some of the gun laws that have taken Florida back. And so that's why I don't think that she was the best choice of AG. But what can I say? She was involved with Trump's legal team throughout the last few years. Trump obviously thought he could trust her. She is savvy in other ways, but she definitely jacked this up. And I think that there's going to be some pretty heavy consequences with this. So this is something that Trump and his administration are going to have to work on. And if by this week we don't really have an update on this, then she and even Kash Patel are going to get we're going to lose a lot of faith in them. There's no doubt. And a lot of people, it's not that Trump will lose support. Well, we're not going to support the Democrats, obviously. So I think that I think that it will keep people from cheerleading for Trump at a minimum, and it will cause people to lose a lot of faith, and they will never trust any sort of political movement again. I think that that's really what it does, and it's going to undermine MAGA in a very big way, and it's going to be very detrimental. And I think anybody that is a right wing journalistic personality, an influencer, a podcaster, or anything like that that even attempts to defend this without any sort of evidence one way or the other, I think it's going to be very detrimental. I think it really is. So we are better than the left because we hold our people accountable. And if the administration doesn't deliver on this or give us hard evidence that they can't deliver on this because the deep state has destroyed the evidence, and if they don't give us the evidence of the destruction of the evidence and who was involved and starts prosecuting those people, then they're going to undermine most of what they're doing. Yes, most people will be happy that they're cutting the size of government, that they're exposing things, but we'll never fully trust what they're doing and won't think in the back of our heads that are there people that you like, as in you, as in Donald Trump and his administration, that he's trying to defend. So I think I think we got to see some results, and hopefully there are things going on in the background where they're trying to expose under and root out duplicitous personnel within the FBI. We know that the FBI was warning about ICE raids and the like. So it is possible that what we are experiencing right now is a governmental civil war. I think that's what we may have, a political civil war. And that is simultaneously the best and the worst case scenario. It's the best because now we know what Trump's administration is up to. They're literally fighting against a political insurrection within the bureaucratic state and the intelligence agencies, which, if we're honest, once again, they tried to kill him twice. They've tried to rig the elections. Uh, we know that they had a lot of other crazy plans that, honestly, if Trump had not won the trifecta, meaning the Electoral College, popular vote, and Congress, he would not have the credibility within all the circles that he has right now, because there's nothing that the left or the deep state can point to right now and say that he's illegitimate. They absolutely can't. He's completely legitimate in every metric that you can measure it by. And so now sabotage is pretty much what they've got left. So I think this is, I hope that's what's going on, but it's also terrifying to think. And this is also why they have to be a little bit quiet about it, because as much as we want to publicly expose this, if we admit to the entire world that basically Donald Trump is fighting a political civil war and we barely have control of our government and intelligence agencies, even though that may be the truth, that basically points to everybody else. And let's say you're making negotiations for the Ukraine war with Russia. You're dealing with what's going on in the Middle East with Israel and Gaza and how the ceasefire is about to blow up. And I think the Israelis are going to go in and finish Gaza once and for all, which I'm totally for. I'm going to be honest about it. But and then we're dealing with China and Taiwan potentially. So, and the cartels now. So we've got like 4 potential conflicts on top of a political civil war right now. The US is in a very vulnerable position. And I don't care how good Trump is, he can't deal with all of these at once when he's still fighting with one hand tied behind his back. And that's dealing with the treachery within our own government. Our blood will be in the water, and other governments will be able to exploit this. So I understand the need for a little bit of secrecy here. But, in some ways, again, I hope that that is the case because then we know what's going on. But there's got to be some signs thrown out there, or else people are going to lose faith. So yes, heads need to be rolled. Heads need to roll. We need to see that there's action being taken to root out these traitors within our country, or else people are just going to be like, no, he's part of the deep state now, or he's covering for somebody else, and we're done. So this is just something that we are going to have to that we're going to have to deal with. And I hope, I really do, I hope that this gets rectified sooner than later. Because it would be a shame after all the good that Trump has done so far that we get back to square one on this Epstein list and that's it. Like he's going to lose a lot of his a lot of his support. Of people that really wanted him to go in there and root out corruption, and we're never going to believe that he's actually going to be able to do it because the Epstein list is the slam dunk. It's the home run. And in many ways, it's the linchpin to reveal all of the corruption within the government. There's almost nothing bigger than that. Um, and now, because of this, you even have people questioning whether the meeting with Zelensky was theater or not. And so, see, that's already starting to undermine the narrative because that happened on the Friday after Pam Bondi did that political stunt. And then she said by 8 a.m., I want these papers here. The SDNY is the problem. And then don't hear anything for hours. Then we get Zelensky coming over and we have that blow up in the Oval Office, which I'm sure was genuine and it seemed legit and it works in our favor. But now, even some people on the right were like, is that real? Is that legit? Was that just a smoke screen to cover up for the fact that the Epstein list wasn't released? And that's a huge problem. That is a huge problem and something that they're going to have to deal with. And you can't just keep obfuscating or hiding this. We're not the left. We're not going to just sit here and be like, yes, powers that be. Of course, Biden is mentally fit. Of course he is. He totally is. So it'll be like the Epstein list. We don't need that. Everything else is going great. No, we're not going to sit idly by. We're going to keep needling every single day. And I know that's something that I've been doing in my tweets. I'm like, hey, awesome. Trump and Vance took down Zelensky. Where's the Epstein list? Oh, great. We've got tariffs coming down now. We've secured the border. Where's that Epstein list? That's literally like how all of my posts are going to be. I'm not going to stop until that is exposed. And that's how we need to be because we got to needle this. We have to hold them accountable. So that's where we're at, and hopefully we get that fixed. I did see somebody mention earlier about that crazy law in California where crime has gotten so bad in California. I believe that California's violent crime statistics are 31% higher than the national average at this point. That now their genius plan is to try to pass a bill where people there have duty to retreat, meaning that if somebody is breaking into your home and attacking you, then and if you try to defend yourself, you may be criminally prosecuted. So now you have to run away. This is the kind of bullshit that we're seeing everywhere. This is what the left perpetuates. This is what we see in authoritarian regimes. You are not allowed to defend yourself. And if you do, because you've now embarrassed the government by being able to defend yourself, essentially, that's what you're doing. That's what they don't tell you. Then they're going to arrest you. Asinine, absolutely foolish, horrific, crazy, abhorrent, whatever you want to call it. It is insane. And this is the same week that Gavin Newsom also launches a podcast because he wants to get in on all this crap. Shameful. California, if you don't get rid of Democratic leadership in your state, I don't know what we can possibly do. I know you have a jungle primary system there. I know things are difficult, but if you cannot, after everything that has happened recently, convince some of your Democrat friends not to vote for the Democrats and to get Kamala Harris potentially in as the next governor of New York, of California, then I just I don't know what to do. Then you guys need to leave if you're a conservative. You need to bail out while you still can and hope that the San Andreas Fault splits that and California goes out and floats into the ocean. That's what you're going to have to hope for because there is no saving that state if this is the direction that you're going to go after everything that has happened. I just don't, the audacity and the insanity is beyond anything that I can almost comprehend. And if it wasn't happening, I wouldn't believe it myself. So it's terrible. It is absolutely terrible what we're seeing there. And this is the opportunity now, better than ever, for California to try to start righting the ship. It's insane. It is insane. Yes, we have other states like this, New York, uh, New York, Illinois, parts of Pennsylvania, obviously Oregon and Washington State are all like this, but California takes the cake and it's the biggest dog. It's got the largest the largest population. So it's wild. It's absolutely wild. I can't believe that this guy Newsom has been able to get away with what he gets away with, and I just don't know what we're gonna do. These states need to break apart. Manhattan's got to become, and the boroughs need to become their own city state, and then the rest of New York can become a conservative state. We need Greater Idaho. We need Illinois to split, and I don't know. I guess what state would you become a part of there? Would it be Missouri or Indiana? I'm not sure. Man, I was thirsty. I got a big thirst starting this with these rants. So, all right, we're almost at the end of the show. I guess I'll end talking a little bit about Andrew Tate and kind of what's going on with conservatism. For those of you that don't know, Andrew Tate has become, I don't really know how to describe him. He really became one of the prominent voices in red pill culture, which is really I guess you'd call it the manosphere kind of thing, pushing against radical feminism over the last few years in the left. But where I think it's become kind of an inversion of radical feminism, where it's kind of the opposite side of the same coin, where radical feminists or radical feminism, not to be confused with like normal feminism, because being pro women's rights is totally fine. And I think it's like kind of how liberal was really came from libertine and being freedom minded. Now liberal is actually what most conservatives are, but it's become a left wing term. So if you're liberal, you're like a left wing communist. If you're a feminist, you're really like a radical fourth wave feminist rather than being pro freedom. If you're a liberal and pro women's rights and equality of women's rights as a feminist. So those terms kind of got flipped around. Anyway, I'm getting into semantics here. So I think it's gone. I think it's kind of gone to that extreme, and I'll just be honest. I think Andrew Tate's a piece of shit. I don't think that there's any way that you can get around it. Um, we can talk all day about whether he's, rightfully charged with some of the things he's been accused of. Um, I think that I think that almost doesn't even really matter to me. I think that I think that a man that talks the way that he does about women, some of the things that he espouses for somebody who's become a Muslim, even though he's a Western guy. I think that that's the antithesis of any example that the right wants to have of positive masculinity. You can be pro man, you can be anti radical feminism, you can espouse against the deep state, you can do all of those things. But I think that it is really all about it. They're two sides of the same coin, and it has to do with the destruction of marriage and destruction of a positive relationship between men and women. And I think that it's a result of really it's what the globalist left or the global authoritarians have created. I think there are two supposedly opposing ideologies that actually undermine and create the same thing, which is we want to destroy marriage and we want the sexes to hate each other. That's exactly what this is. Um, so this is absolutely a travesty. It's terrible, and I don't think anybody on the right should have anything to do with Andrew Tate. And it doesn't mean that you deplatform. Again, if the guy's not criminally charged, that's that. It is what it is. If you can't find the evidence or anything like that, that doesn't change the fact that he's a piece of crap who nobody on the right should want to platform. And it doesn't mean that you don't believe in freedom of speech. It's that if somebody's a piece of shit, I'm not going to bring them on my show. I'm not even going to want to debate them because their words speak for themselves. Let's be honest. Andrew Tate has absolutely nothing good to say based on his previous comments and what he's said about women and how he's exploited people. And here's the other problem, too. Even if you think he had a legitimate business by setting up cam girls and all this stuff, he's also promoting debauchery within men, trying to extract value and money from men to look at basically debaucherous material instead of trying to create positive, you know, positive examples of being a man. Look, I'll be honest, I'll get a little bit personal here. I've gone through some things in my past where I may have reasons to have grievances against people of the opposite sex, um, and to be angry about certain things. That doesn't change the fact that I will never judge all women based on how I may have been mistreated in the past by other women or what I've seen, the behavior that I've seen from other people, because I've seen equal amounts of really bad women and really bad men. I've been stabbed in the back by people who I thought were my best friends. I've been stabbed in the back by people that I very much cared about. And, but the one thing is, I've never allowed that to influence how I judge other people, whether they're men or women. It has made me more cynical about certain relationships, absolutely, and more defensive about certain things and more cautious. But that's just having a lack of, that's just not being naive about the situation. So I think it's good to teach men and women, let's be honest, to have higher standards for themselves, to be independent financially, and to be strong in the sense of you don't want people to walk over you, you don't want people to take advantage of you, you don't want to be naive, you want to protect your assets and the things that you work for, because unfortunately today in a society where there is a lack of morality and religion, in many cases you have to, because you never know if somebody is going to lie, cheat, or steal from you, and that could be a spouse, it could be a business partner, it could be your best friend, it could even be your own family, and I think that that is something that's okay to talk about, but not at the expense of saying, well, all women are trash because there's gold diggers on the internet and OnlyFans girls exist. And then all men are trash because these guys are just a bunch of players that are sleeping around and caring about body counts, which now, that happens on the female side of things as well. So I think that we have to do better. So as men, we have to show strength. We have to have personal responsibility for ourselves. We've got to look out for ourselves, but we can't do that at the expense of hating women. We have to be good fathers, good brothers, good sons, be leaders in our community, treat women with respect, and also have to look for people who are respectful towards us. I think you should always um, date slowly, get to know somebody as completely as possibly as you can. Let your standards be known. Be completely honest about what you want out of life. Be completely honest about your moral values, whether you want to have kids or not, what your goals are, and who you are. And if somebody doesn't like it, just don't go out with them. And that's it. Don't feel bad about breaking up with people that are not good for you. And before you get married, be absolutely prepared that this is somebody um, that you want to be with. And yes, we have to acknowledge that men and women are different. We think differently. We have our strengths and weaknesses when it comes to the way that we handle our emotions, the way that we handle things, our needs, emotionally and physically. And we need more positive examples out there. That's something that I've always wanted to try to show, despite how things may or may not have worked out for me in the past. I think that I always tried to show a positive example of uh, of what I believed in throughout the years that I've been on the internet. Hopefully, those of you that have watched me for a while have appreciated that. But I also don't hold that things may not have worked out you know, and I'll never hold how other people may have treated me in the past against somebody else in the future. So you don't want to be so consumed by how people may have mistreated you in the past or what you see on the internet, because let's be honest, the internet really thrives on showing the worst examples of men and women. What do we see all the time? We see cam girls and e-girls or basically OnlyFans models and these women on social media exploiting men, selling their bodies online and all this stuff. And then we see men that treat women as trash. Everything's becoming transactional, and that's a huge problem. So uh and it's become like a revenge kind of thing, right? Where I'm going to get revenge on all women, or I'm going to get revenge on all men because these people are terrible, or because maybe these chicks over here only want to come out with me just to get a free dinner, or maybe these dudes over here only want to date younger women all the time and just keep going through all these women, never commit to anything. uh that's what we see, and sometimes you're just going to get unlucky, right? You can be with somebody for many years, and at the end of the day, for whatever reason, things change, and they kick you to the curb, and that's it. And maybe you did something wrong too, and you and you're angry at the world. But you've got to strive for excellence, and you really do have to look for a partner. And I think one of the things that we've also been convinced of is that you have no value if you're alone. It's okay to be alone. It is. I think everybody sees being in a relationship as a status symbol. Nowadays, it's a lot harder than ever. The dating scene, whatever. And a lot of that is because of what social media and society has done, what it's perpetuated, the examples that they show, and the fact that everybody can compare themselves to one another, right? So you everybody goes around thinking that everybody's an 8, 9, or 10, and that's it. So that's what you need to expect. So you only want to date the most beautiful or most handsome people, but then you forget that having integrity and having somebody that really loves you is more important than anything like that. And you're going to get old one day, and everybody's going to start looking bad at some point. So you really do want somebody who's going to be extremely loyal to you, somebody who loves you, who understands boundaries and respects you, and will be there at the end of the day, and somebody who also pushes your values, so that if you have children, that you've got a partner, a wife. I'm a man, so a wife that's going to back you up in the way that you raise your children, or if you're a woman, a husband that's going to help you with all of that and back you up to raise those kids and be there at the end of the day. And it can be tough. It is. It is true. I've been blindsided to night train, and it's a terrible feeling. It's the most painful thing. to okay. Hopefully I'm back on here and knocked the cable out. So it's a terrible thing and it can be very painful, but we can't allow people like Andrew Tate to undermine and kind of prey on that pain and that anger that we have sometimes to push us to believe things that are immoral and bad. So really my advice to everybody is Rolo says I'm looking rough. Man, I'm getting older every day. I got a little bit of gray hairs coming on here. Just diet, exercise, and do that as long as you can, and keep your mind right, and you'll feel great. And even in your 60s and 70s, you can still you'll still be fine. I'm sure you're doing good, Greg. You got a nice truck. So, and we all get old anyway, right? So, we're all going to look in the mirror one day, and we're going to be like, "What the hell happened to this guy?" And that's it. You got to be realistic. So you want to find somebody that, you know, of course you want attraction, but there's going to get a point where, you know, the gorilla of physical desire is going to go from being in the front seat, beating you down all the time, pushing you towards, just that physical attraction and wanting to, I don't need to get explicit about it. I have physical fun all the time. That gorilla is going to jump in the trunk one day, and you're not going to care about that as much. And you're going to want somebody who is a companion for you, and your best friend, and the love of your life, and somebody that that you can grow old with, and have there right at the end when you die, and that you can maybe raise some kids with if you're older and you can't have kids anymore, and at least you've got somebody there with you. So, that's really what I have. And in the meantime, worry about yourself. We can't obsess about being in relationships all the time, and I think that's very difficult. Um, Especially when you're younger and you still have, your hormones going crazy. So you want to run around and you want to have fun or whatever. It can be difficult, but work on yourself. Build an empire for yourself. Build a business. Love your hobbies. Have good friends. You can have friends that are platonic, of the opposite sex, but, hang out with your male friends. Have people hold you accountable. Same thing for women, you know and find things for your to do to distract yourself so that you don't feel alone all the time. If that's something that you're suffering from, don't be desperate for it. I can tell you that, um, in the past, when I stopped caring about, uh, you know, ages ago, when I stopped caring about things is when I met is when I ended up meeting people. But when I obsessed over it or I felt bad about my situation, it just seemed to perpetuate that situation and make you feel worse. So you got to love yourself. It's like it's kind of like what I said earlier about the United States, right? We got to work on our own house in order to be able to help others. You got to love yourself. It may sound cliche, and work on yourself and uh, and do that, and then hopefully you'll attract somebody that is more to your liking. And you have to reprioritize things. You do have to reprioritize things. Beauty is not the most important factor. Compatibility and mutual respect and love are going to be the biggest things. And somebody who has the same values as you politically, spiritually, financially, because that obviously hurts a lot of relationships and will lead to, divorce and things like that. You don't want to have somebody that's just going to throw away the money that you guys earned together. Um, that would be a good thing, and that will affect everything else. So that's kind of my advice to everybody. And don't watch these red pill bros. They've got really nothing good for you to say. You don't want to just be a nice guy pushover. Definitely not. That's not good as well, because a lot of times people are nice guys, but then you start building up this resentment. I've seen it in a lot of people where they're like, well, I'm a nice guy. Like people should want to have to date me. No, now you're starting to you start getting an entitled attitude as well. We're not owed anybody. Not everybody has a soulmate that you're going to meet. Some people will be single their entire lives. That's just the way it is. Some people aren't cut out to be married. Some people aren't cut out to be parents. Some of us won't get lucky. So you have to find something else. You've got to be happy with yourself, because at the end of the day, it's going to be you and your relationship with God. That's it. Everybody else may not be around. They may abandon you. They may not be there. So you've got to be right with yourself, and you got to be right with God. And, that's the best that we can all do at the end of the day. And if you're lucky and you meet somebody fantastic who shares your values, have appreciation for that. Don't take things for granted, because you never know when you may lose that. And enjoy the times that you have. Because again, you never know when that train's going to hit you on the side and change everything forever. So always be prepared, but don't be too cynical about things. So that's what I've got to say about Andrew Tate. So hopefully you all appreciated that little aside. We're more than 2 hours past. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel. Share it out there. Thank you for the support from Greg the Goblin and Joe C with the 50 and the gifted chat. If you want to support the show and what I do here, you can become a channel member. You can join the Patreon. I got Cash App as well if you don't want to support YouTube in any way. I totally get it. I will be back next week. Stay tuned. I'm going to clip this out as I have been lately. It seems like the shorts are getting more and more views. So I appreciate that. Share those out. I'm going to start posting them on Instagram and X as well, and different platforms. So spread the word that Rolo's around and he's back and doing all this stuff. I'll be back for Fortnite on Friday with the family. Thank you for supporting that as well. I'm very blessed that I've got, my brother, my uncle, and my father. So there you go. You get to see a bunch of crazy men from different generations playing video games together, and I think that's just it's a good time. So I appreciate all of you. Have a wonderful week. Good luck. God bless you all. God bless America. And have a wonderful night. Take care, everyone.